And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey folks, today we're taking a look at Fairy Tale from Z-Man Games. Now, this is called Fairy Tale, a new story, as opposed to Fairy Tale, the original game. It's essentially the same game, but I thought if you've never played Fairy Tale before, don't worry, because I'm going to go into full detail about how to play, because this is such a great game. But if you have this one already, the main difference is this one has 10 new cards. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Also, it has a much nicer box, because this old box was crazy. Also, the artwork looks much better on the box, although essentially it's the same artwork on the cards. Anyway, enough about that. Let's look how to play this fantastically fun drafting game. In Fairy Tale, players are going to get a handful of cards each round of the game. And they're going to take a look at these cards, and they're going to do what is called drafting, which is where they're going to say, okay, I'm going to keep one of these cards. Then they're going to take the remaining cards and pass them to the person to the left of them. They'll take those cards, take one, and keep going until each player has 5 cards. After each player has gotten 5 cards, each player then is going to take a card in front of them, play those cards, and then do that 3 times in a row. So at the end of a round, you will have 3 cards played face up in front of you. So let's say these are the 3 cards that are played face up in front of me. Everyone gets 5 more cards, and you do the same thing except you pass them in the other direction, and you will keep doing this until it's happened 4 times, and players will have 12 cards in front of them, and they will then score those cards, and whoever has the most cards wins the game. So that's basically how the game is played. Let's take a look at some of the cards. Some cards, like this Children of the Dragon, or these homesteaders here, which are people who live in my city, or this mischievous fairy, these are worth points equal to the number that you have. So the more of these you have, the better. So obviously, one of them is worth 1 point, but you get 2, they're each worth 2. You get 3, they're each worth 3. You get 4, and you can see here, like for example, if I get 6 mischievous fairies, that's 36 points. In the bottom corner of each card, it tells you how many are in the game, so you can see that there's 7 Children of the Dragon in the game, so if you get all 7 of them, they're worth 49 points. Other cards work together. For example, in Elven Warrior, when you play that card, it's worth 3 points. But you see at the bottom it says, Friends with the Bard. That's because bards are worth 3 points for every Elven Warrior that you have. It works the same way with the Knights of the Round Table are friends with the Bronze Dragons. And the Dwarven Warriors are friends with the Skydance Dragons. So you can see here that the Dwarven Warrior is worth 3 times the number of Skydance Dragons. So if I have 3 of these Skydance Dragons in play, then this guy is going to be worth 9 points. If I get a couple of him into play, you can see how the points will add up quite quickly. Some cards have effects that go into play. For example, this one here. If I play this card, the Fairy Ring, it's worth 6 points, but it says I have to flip one other fairy card. So if I already had this Mischievous Fairy in play, I'd have to flip this face down. So I lose points by playing this one, but it's worth 6. Of course, I can always play cards like this that say you unflip one fairy card, which will then let me unflip that. So the cards will still be in play in front of you, but they can be flipped up and down. There's cards of each color that will cause people to flip them. There's also some cards in the deck called shadows, like this werewolf here, which makes everybody flip one of their yellow cards, or everybody flips one of their green cards. And sometimes like this one here, where I have to flip any one card. So if a player plays an unflip card, all the unflipping happens first, then flipping happens. So if I say unflip a fairy card and then someone else says flip a fairy card face down, well, tough luck for me. And there's even cards like this that let me unflip any 2 cards. Of course, you can see that this one is worth -1 point. Now there is an expert version of the game in which you add 30 expert cards into the mix. Here's an example of one, the Egg of Chaos. This here counts as Children of the Dragon, Mischievous Fairy, and Homesteaders. It's only ever going to be worth 2 points at the most, but it makes the other ones go up in value. So that's a useful card. There's also this card here called the Almighty. This is worth -1, but it essentially can act as any card in the game. So you can play this and say, oh, this is a Mischievous Fairy, or this is a Skydance Dragon. It's up to you. Here we have the Fairy Queen, which is an example of cards that hunt other cards. This hunts all the shadow cards. Or here's another, the Gold Dragon hunts shadow cards. What hunting means, if anyone else plays this a shadow card at the same time you play this card, it gets flipped down. And there's a lot of cool shadow cards. There's this one here, which when you play it, you get to draw 2 cards, which may be cards that you want to play later this turn. There's other cards, like this one here, which give you points for the number of storybook icons that you have on your cards. So, times 2 in this case. Other cards have conditional points. Like, for example here, this is this fairy tale. It's worth 9 points. But for it to be worth 9 points, you have to have the Fairy Queen in play. If you don't have the Fairy Queen in play, well then you're not going to get those 9 points. The same thing with this one, for example. See this Knight's Tale? It's worth 9 points, but only if you have the Sword King in play. So these are really interesting because you're kind of hoping to get the other card in play, and then you get more points. Others give conditional points, like this one gives you 6 points if you have the most Holy Empire cards. This one gives you 7 points if you have 4 of 2 different types of cards. This one here, the Gatekeeper gives you points for every castle card that you have. This gives you 6 points if you have the most shadow cards. This gives you 7 points if you have the most of those 2 types of cards. This gives you 9 points if you have the Gold Dragon, etc. There's a lot of these cards in the game, and they're kind of iffy, and they don't guarantee points like the rest of the cards do, and they're really dangerous if they get flipped face down, but they also offer a lot of points. Fairy Tale has always been a game that I've been a big promoter of. I've had it ever since it first came out in 2005, which is almost 10 years old now. It's been part of my collection. Always want to play it. Love drafting. Now, there are not that many drafting games out there. I wish there was more because it's a great mechanism. And this is on the lighter end of the scale. Now, it's not quite so light as, say, Sushi Go, which is a really simple drafting game. But at the same time, it's lighter than games like Seven Wonders. Now, a couple things I'd like to talk about in this game. First of all, Fairy Tale is very simple. You're just taking cards and then scoring them. Now, knowing how to score them is where the game in there lies, but it's not that complex. And you're taking 5 cards or 4 cards and 3 cards and picking one of those to keep. But I want to say right now that I absolutely 100% say you play with the expert cards every time. They're not that hard to figure out. If you're like, oh, I don't know if I can pull this one off, then pass it on and draft a different card. They do mean that the basic cards will be handed out less, which I think is a good thing. But at the same time, I mean, because it makes the different cards rarer. But the new cards in this set, the 10 new cards that they added, really make these expert cards shine. That mystical egg, or whatever it's called. What is that card called? That weird little egg, the Egg of Chaos. It's really cool. It's only worth 2 points, but it adds 1 to the 3 different sets. And it counts as 1 of each set. So if you're collecting 2 of the sets, it's useful. It makes those sets a little bit better. In the original game, it was slightly better to get those mismatch sets where you had the card was equal 3 times the number of other cards. Those sets were a little better. The Egg of Chaos helps out. And those ones that let you draw 2 cards, I like those quite a bit because sometimes you draw a card, oh, this is one of the mischievous fairies that I was looking for. Drafting is fun in general, because when you draft, you're taking cards you want, at the same time trying not to give the other person what they need. And because this game takes place over 4 turns, you can say, oh, well, they have a lot of mischievous fairies out there. There's no way I'm going to give them any more. But at the same time, it's not too long. This game does not wear out its welcome, although I bet you when you play this for the first time, you're going to instantly play it again. And maybe even play it 3 times in a row, because that's really how much fun Fairy Tale is. The artwork is good. The graphic design on these new cards is much better than the old ones. It's easy. I mean, you're like, oh, it looks complicated. It's flipping and unflipping and hunting. It's not complicated. And as you put the cards out, it's really easy to look around the board, see what other people have. You play it. This is a very fast game. We're talking 15 minutes once everyone knows what they're doing, because you draft, play. Draft, play. And you do that 4 times and the game is over. It is an excellent game. There's a reason it's been in print for 10 years. I highly recommend this new version. The box is better, holds the cards better. Really easy to teach. I played it with all the number of players in the box here, 2 through 5. 2 is okay. 2 is not as fun of a drafting game, but it works really well with 3, 4, and 5. So, Highly recommend this. Should be in everybody's collection, in my opinion. If you say, I'm not a big fan of fantasy games, I understand that, but you can totally ignore the theme if you want. The theme is not really deep here. And just try to get different combinations of numbers, and you will enjoy that. Adding in the expert cards, there's also a variation where you can play with teams, and Richard Garfield put in a variation where when you play a certain card, you have a chance to pass cards to your partner. I played that way. It's okay, but I like the basic game with the expanded cards in, where I'm just playing for myself, trying to get the highest score I possibly can. Easy as pie, and pie is pretty easy, and fun to play. Get it. Fairy Tale.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at DicetowerNetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.
Shut the door!
There.